Welcome to this DW Business special, where we're asking, can China afford a war? Beijing has been carrying out military exercises ever since a visit by US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan earlier this month. Its military vessels now fill the seas surrounding the island, which it claims as its own. As fears grow that China could attack Taiwan, we're asking if the Chinese economy is strong enough to deal with the consequences. Well, to discuss the various challenges facing Beijing at home, we're joined by Alexander Görlach, who is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs in New York. Thanks a lot for joining us, Alexander. There's plenty to talk about because these are interesting times for China watchers, aren't they?
Thanks for having me. Yes, and indeed they are. When I lived in Taiwan 5 years ago, there was already the sky was cloudening, if that's a word. But now I feel we are in the midst of a real turmoil and tempest.
Well, we're going to get stuck into all of that. And before we do, I just want to set out the economic situation for people actually living in China right now. So despite decades of consistent economic growth, China remains a country with comparatively low GDP per capita, so economic output per person, when you put it alongside the likes of the US, Taiwan and Germany. And what's more, the once seemingly unstoppable force of China's economy appears to be losing its momentum. The International Monetary Fund expects China's economic growth to steadily slow in the coming years. So, Alexander Görlach, has something changed with China? Are the days of ever-accelerating growth and expanding middle class over now?
Well, on a general note, after decades of growth, that's not uncommon to reach a plateau on which it then becomes much more arduous to succeed further and further. But that aside, also China has had quite some bad 2 years in regard to the corona pandemic and the zero COVID policies by the central government, by Xi Jinping, have also caused a toll on the economy, as we know that global supply chains have been shattered, if you will. You have production sites closed, the city of Shanghai closed for several weeks. So that all has not helped the Chinese economy, to put it mildly.
President Xi Jinping has built so much of his reputation on the lives of Chinese people getting better and this expanding middle class. But now that economic growth is starting to slow, is that going to be a problem for Xi Jinping?
Well, it's moreover, it's a bigger problem that, of course, is adamant for the middle class, but it's in the bigger picture. The recent policies by Xi Jinping, that the common prosperity is, in his eyes, a way of taking or amplifying wealth in the country. And if you look into China and compare it with the United States, you will be seeing that inequality is actually almost to the exact figure, the same. So even though China has a diametrical opposing political system than the United States, they both have embraced a certain specific form of capitalism. You can call it neoliberal. It's definitely not the social market economy that we have here in Germany and that many Western European countries adhere to. Also, to a certain extent in East Asia, like Korea and Taiwan do so. So China has Deng Xiaoping said back in the days, let's just get a few people rich, and then it's as we know from America, trickling down to everybody. But that didn't happen. So there is a general problem of how capitalism was set up in China, and now all the other problems, the real estate sector crisis, the banking crisis, also the crisis of credits in the framework of the Road and Belt initiatives, they all build on a system that we see in the United States already failing, this so-called neoliberal economy. So China has to battle and to put out lots of fires here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the real estate crisis, because one of the biggest headaches for Xi Jinping and China's ruling Communist Party is a crisis in the country's property sector. It goes well beyond the very well publicised financial woes of developer China Evergrande and its $300 billion debt pile. Chinese property firms have been defaulting on their debts at a rate never seen before. Meanwhile, angry would-be homeowners have been boycotting their mortgage payments. They're refusing to hand over any more money for buildings that haven't been built yet. Well, Alexander Görlach, just help explain how deep the crisis in China's real estate sector really is.
So in China, for the longest time, until very recently, it was like the investment of the middle class. If you have set aside some money to buy apartments, also families would just gather the money and just buy someone for the newlywed or whatever. So, but the difference in China compared, for instance, to Germany is that you could already pay for an apartment that has not been built yet. So it was not it was maybe in the planning stages, but you were already starting to pay for it, and hence also having to pay your mortgages that you took from the bank to pay this apartment. So what then happened is that the developers would just use this money for other exploitations, like buying more land for more projects that have not yet been assigned. So meaning like they did not use the money for the apartments, but then like literally when these apartments were built, they would just take the money from the people that in the meantime bought apartments that have not yet been built. So it reminds a little of the Madoff guy in the financial crisis, before the financial crisis, who just also like, took the money after people trusting in him. And whenever somebody asked him for their return, he would just like take the money of someone who invested later with him. And we see this kind of unfolding now in China, and this unregulated market has now just like exploded.
Yeah, it seems like it was ultimately an unsustainable system, wasn't it? But how important is the real estate market to China's broader economy? Because I suspect it's a rather big deal.
Oh, it has been like the bedrock of, as I mentioned, like it was seen as a rock solid investment form. And this is also why, it's always about trust when we see crisis, a financial crisis, a currency crisis, a bond crisis, and now a real estate crisis also. Just like for the longest time, people just trusted in the purpose and the revenues and the profit of investing into apartments. And that now has been shattered. So it has, of course, an economic cost, which other observers are of the same opinion. What I read, like there will be a bailout by the government, because otherwise the middle class is going to rate, the country, basically.
Yeah, well, that's the real estate sector. But let's discuss another looming crisis facing the Chinese government as well, this time relating to its vast Belt and Road Initiative. So just 5 years ago, Xi Jinping described the sprawling programme of overseas infrastructure investments as the project of the century. It's seen Beijing fund transport routes, as you can see, ports as well, almost in every corner of the globe. But it started to become an enormous burden just recently to the Chinese as borrower countries struggle to make their debt repayments. So Alexander Görlach, has China overstretched itself with the Belt and Road Initiative?
There has always been like a mild form of criticism, because harsh criticism isn't allowed in China, but a mild sort of criticism saying like, and you mentioned this, the GDP per capita in this country isn't great. We don't have schools everywhere. We don't have like good roads everywhere. So why the heck do we like invest everywhere in the world? And also, especially because, and that is also not a secret, the criteria for investing were not economic ones, but political ones. So you wanted all the Belt and Road Initiative projects by Chinese law need to be used also for Chinese purposes, if people cannot pay back their loans. But then also it includes the military use. So you clearly see that the Belt and Road Initiative was not designed to create revenues and profit, but to help a political agenda. And again, here also the COVID-19 pandemic did not help, because that also hindered or brought to a halt economies in developing countries where China has been heavily investing. And if I'm not mistaken, it's 16 or 18% of the total of the almost like $900 billion that have been invested that now are under reconstruction. So it's clear like the borrowers cannot pay back, and so China needs to help them. And the IMF needs to help them to what's the word, to recreate, not to recreate, to rearrange the credit.
Yeah, yes, that's right. They need to restructure their debts, don't they? But one of the big advantages, it seemed, of Belt and Road, or how it managed to dominate where other foreign infrastructure plans hadn't, was that Beijing was willing to lend to countries that other countries weren't willing to lend to. But in the end, has China been too careless with who it lends to?
Well, the contracts that constitute all these credits, they are not public. So China doesn't make them public. It's only public if, like, the countries they have this credit given to is choosing to somehow publish it, or it's getting leaked. So all this, in my opinion, doesn't seem to me to be like the proper way of how you do structure and build and create these credits, especially on that scale and globally. And so I can only, that's just an assumption I make because there is a lack of data here. But I feel because the political agenda was like always in the forefront of the mind, and certainly also a little, at least one portion of hubris was also part of the game. And that now led to the situation China is in now.
Yeah, and while we're talking about Chinese foreign policy, let's turn to a situation that has developed dramatically over the past couple of weeks, and that is Taiwan. So since US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's historic visit to the island, China has responded with a multitude of measures. Almost immediately, it banned imports of thousands of Taiwanese products. It also then banned exports of sand to Taiwan, which the island needs for construction. And Beijing created an effective blockade of Taiwan with ships patrolling the surrounding waters. So, Alexander, does China really want a conflict right now?
Well, some say so and others so. Like, clear is that China has emphasized in the last years, more emphasized on a non-peaceful, what they call reunification. And you always have to be clear, like, China claims Taiwan as a part of the People's Republic of China, which just never has been. So this claim is, it's up in the air. But like, that's China's interest, which the United States always said they acknowledge but not agree to. So you have this sort of political situation which is singular in the whole world. So and Xi Jinping has geared up his game in regard to I want Taiwan back. It's his goal by latest 2049 when the country turns 100. And it's also like it's like the cornerstone of his ideology. The rejuvenation of the nation will be completed once Taiwan is in fold and belongs to the People's Republic of China. Within that frame, there is lots of interpretation to whether or not Xi now wants an assault on Taiwan or not. So we can only say that the assaults have gotten like more in number by crossing the median in the Taiwan Strait, by also like crossing into Taiwanese airspace. So China, that's, I think, is safe to say, the People's Republic, it's safe to say, wants to make clear that if they had to, they would be taking the country by force.
There's that received political wisdom, isn't there, that if things aren't going well for you as a political leader, then you start a war, or at least in this case, threaten it. Is that what we're seeing here? Is this Taiwan business a distraction from all of those economic challenges back home that we've been talking about?
So I personally would say there's a big yes to that. She wants to become leader for life. He wants to have a third tenure as a president, which basically then opens the door to that. He has not much to show for in the 20th Party Congress in October. So being the commander-in-chief and having like a vital sort of like conflict at the doorstep. And you have to remind yourself that every school child, every kindergarten kid in China learns that Taiwan allegedly is a part of China. So he can, of course, like assemble people around this claim. And he can certainly, because he also stepped up the ultra-nationalist game during his tenure. So he knows, even despite the fact that houses are not built anymore, banks do not pay, give not out money to the people who put money in their banks. That's all in his rational. The moment there is this conflict with Taiwan, China will unite behind him.
You've already mentioned how Xi Jinping has said that reuniting, as he would put it, Taiwan with the rest of China is one of the key aims for his leadership. How likely, though, is an invasion actually looking? It's all very alarming when you see the military exercises going on and the boats surrounding the island. But is an invasion in any way imminent?
So, I mean, I feel like Mr. Xi is pretty much looking to Mr. Putin and what he did in regards to Ukraine. And then it was the same playbook, kind of like, we have a military drill, but it goes to Monday. Then they said, no, it's going to be until Wednesday. And so it's just like, so what I think the idea behind all that is like to create like the highest degree possible of uncertainty so that the Taiwanese army is on their toes all the time. And that this over time will wear out the people who are like, adamantly, staunchly, like not in favor of anything that's called a reunification. They also like no fence anymore of one country, two systems because of what happened to Hong Kong. So the idea could be to like wear them out like with military exercises as provocations to then somehow heighten the pressure on another end, economically, whatever, to then over time make the Taiwanese bow to this pressure. A fully fledged invasion at this point, military strategists say like that an amphibious assault might be possible by equipment that the so-called People's Liberation Army has, but maybe not by the soldiers' skill. It would also be plausible or probable that this amphibious assault would be stopped by submarines, be it Taiwanese or US-American submarines. So all in all, it's like China stepped up the game, has gained more capabilities, military capabilities, but experts say like it might not lead to an immediate attack on the island.
Okay, well, we can, I suppose, hope for that. Alexander Görlach from the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. It's been fascinating to hear what you've had to say, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all for this business special, looking at the challenges facing China and asking whether or not it can afford a war. Thanks for watching. Now, if you've enjoyed this, there's lots more from us on the DW News YouTube channel and on Facebook. And, why not check out our topic of the week from last week, where we discussed the true impact of sanctions on Russia. It's a really fascinating watch. I'd highly recommend it. Until next time, do take care.